In England, so one of the French speaker, um, he said the people of this world are three types of person. First is a person like spider. Second is a person like ant. And third is a person like a bee. So a person like a spider is the one who should not exist, who is giving a hard time to others. And a person like ant is only people who care about their families. It's being selfish. They're living in this world for their selfish purposes. And third is a person like a bee. It's not just that he cares about himself, but is living the life for others as well. And this person must exist. This person is a necessary person, a person like a bee. Let us say to the person next to us, where do you think you belong? Ask the person next to you, where do you belong? Like, seriously. So ask, where do you belong? Are you a spider? Are you an ant? Or are you a bee? A spider? Those who are hearing this word today, I hope you live a life like a bee. Not someone who could influence others. So you're living for not only for yourself but for others as well, and being a necessary person. So for the church and for the world, you're needed. I hope you become a person like that. And if you look at the main verse today, Psalms chapter 92, our main word not is describing two types of people. First is the evil, and second is the righteous. First is the evil, second is the righteous. So I'm not evil, I'm not righteous. I'm in the middle. Well, the Bible does not acknowledge the one in the middle. So you're either evil or either righteous. So if you're not evil, you're righteous. Well, if you're not righteous, then you're evil. Then if you're not evil, then you're righteous. You're either one of those. There's no middle. So the Bible describes people that are living this world two ways, evil or righteous. So who are the evil and the righteous? Well, in the Bible, evil, the righteous, when people use this word, is talking about the relationship that they have with God. Talking about the relationship that we have with God. So in other words, what kind of a relationship am I in with God? So based on those standards, you could either be evil or you could either be righteous. So then, if that's the case, who is a righteous person that the Bible describes? Well, a person who is on a good relationship with God, who's in a proper, great relationship with God, the Bible describes them as righteous. So in this world, people who set up good deeds is nicer people, who is always performing good actions. That's what we describe righteous in this world, but in the Bible. The Bible describes righteous is like a relationship status. So what kind of a relationship am I in? If you're in a good relationship, a proper relationship with God, then you are righteous. So then for us, so by what should we keep in relationship with God? And the answer is by faith. In Romans chapter 5 verses 1, St. Paul says that, let us read Romans chapter 5 verses 1. Romans chapter 5 verses 1. Therefore, since we have been justified through faith. So when we believe in God, we have been justified through faith. And we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, whom we gained by access by faith and through grace in which we now stand. So because by faith we are keeping peace with God. So evil. So people who like to fool others, is always making bad actions, well, we might describe them as evil, but in this case is the person who is in a bad relationship with God. That's what the Bible describes an evil person. Why? Because they are not living by faith. So their relationship with God is like broken. So their relationship with God is blocked because they're not living by faith. So in other words, the evil are the ones that are living in this world without faith and does not believe in God. And people who are living by faith and opposite are the righteous. So let us look to the person next to us and say, I hope you become a righteous person. I hope you become the righteous. I hope you are able to experience the blessings the righteous gets. So, people who left God, the evil, what kind of a life do they live? Well, if you look in verse 7, let us read verse 7 together. So, the wicked are like spring up like grass. So that though the wicked spring up like grass and all the evildoers flourish, you'll be destroyed forever. It says this on Psalms chapter 92, verse 7. So the being like a grass. So first is that they don't last long. Well, no matter how spring up they might be, they're easily destroyed. So, Psalms chapter 92 Psalms chapter 90 verses 6. Psalms chapter 90 verses 6. In the morning it springs up new, but by evening it is dry and withered. So, a grass flowers, it springs up by new, but then in the evening it's dry and withered. So that is the life of the evil. So do not be jealous of how good, how much money, how much wealth the evil might have. Do not be jealous of them because they do not last long. They won't last long. So to look to the end, and we must look at what will happen, the results. So yes, because the evil, even though they might look new and good, well, they won't last long. They'll easily be destroyed. And secondly, grasses can't bear fruit. However, what kind of a life does the righteous live? Well, through our main word today, I would like to think about the blessings the righteous will receive. So, first, let us read verse 12 together. So the righteous will flourish like a palm tree. So the righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon. Wait, so the word palm tree in Hebrew is tamar. And this means is to make it stand straight. So being like a palm tree grows up straight, perfectly straight. So a well-grown palm tree is almost 30 meters long. And a fun fact is Judah's daughter-in-law, her name was Tamar, and the name Tamar meant palm tree. And one of the important characteristics that a palm tree has is that it grows strong, straight. It has roots on the ground, and it grows perfectly straight, so it's able to bear fruits. So the righteous will flourish like a palm tree, is meaning that they will live a life of bearing fruits. However, the wicked is living like a life like a grass. Grasses, they can't bear fruits, so they don't have fruits. However, the righteous will flourish like a palm tree. Palm tree meaning that they will be able to bear fruits. So one of the most important reasons why God has chosen us is so that we could live the life of bearing fruit. Let us read John chapter 15, verses 16. Let us read John chapter 15, verses 16. So it says, "You did not choose me, but I chose you. I appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that you will bear fruit. You did not choose me. He chose us. God had chosen us. And the most important reason why that God had chosen us was so that we could be able to bear fruit. So that we could live a life that will bear fruit and that will last. God has chosen us." So John chapter 15, we describe it as a parable of a grape tree. So when a farmer plants a grape tree, well, they plant it without expecting anything because it's really hard for it to bear fruit. Well, but one thing the farmer does kind of wish inside him is the fruit. However, if you look in John chapter 15, verses 1, he says, I am the true vine, and my Father is a gardener. So let us read John chapter 15, verses 5. He says, "I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." So Jesus is the vine, we are the branches. So what bears the fruit? The branches are the ones that will bear fruit. So Jesus has chosen us to be the branch that could bear the fruit. So then the important thing is, in order for us to flourish like a palm tree, we must become the life that will bear fruits. So a tree is decided on whether or not they could bear fruits. Well, based on whether you could bear fruits or not, it's like decided that either you're a good tree or a bad tree. So every good trees, they bear good fruit. However, every bad tree, they bear bad fruit. So then the conclusion, let us read Matthew chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7, verses 17. Matthew chapter 7, verses 17 says, "Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit." Let us read verse 20 together. "Thus, by their fruit, you will recognize them." So, by their fruit, you could recognize them. So, based on what fruit they bear, you could either decide they're a bad tree or a good tree. Because a bad tree, how can a bad tree bear good fruit? And from a good tree, how can you bear a bad fruit? Like I told you guys before, it's impossible to bear good fruit from a spiky tree. So that's why on verse 20 says, "Thus by their fruit you will recognize them." And that's not just for plants, but it's for people too. So the standard that you will either decide that this person lived a good life or not is by what fruit that they will bear. Based on their fruit, you could either decide whether they lived a good life or not. So that's why we need to bear a good fruit, and we must have the grace to flourish like a palm tree. So what kind of a good fruit, a beautiful fruit that the Bible is talking about? So it's talking about two fruits. First is a personality fruit, like a fruit of personality. So when we live this world in faith, we will become like Jesus. So how much similar I could be to Jesus? How much can I be like him and his personality? That's how we decide. So Let us read John chapter 15 verses 10. John chapter 15 verses 10. So, if you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I kept my Father's command and remain in his love. Let us read verse 11 together. Verse 11 together. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. So it's talking about joy. So love, joy, what are those? Those are personality. They're personality traits. So just like how Jesus lived a life filled with love, we must live a life filled with joy and love as well. So Galatians chapter 5 verses 22 talks about 9 fruits. So one of the 9 fruits is a fruit of personality, fruit of traits. So through just personality, there's a fruit as well, and that is the fruit of personality and trait. And as Christians, well, Christians actually meant a small Christ. Christian means small Christ. So when we live in faith with Jesus, we cannot be exactly become like him, but we could be similar to him. We could kind of be similar. We could become similar to him. So I've served him for 5 years. Well, even though how many years is important, is what matters the most is that how much you're similar to him. So this fruit of personality must be needed in order to satisfy Jesus. And second is the fruit of evangelizing. So people who are prosperous, who will grow, must evangelize. So when we believe in Jesus, how many people do you evangelize? How many fruits of evangelizing have you bared within you? So we throw this question and someone says this. Well, I can't even withhold myself. How am I going to spread to other people? Well, evangelize the fruit of evangelizing. It will bear so much fruit that it will not only satisfy yourself, but it will also satisfy God, and it will satisfy other people too. Well, if we don't evangelize, how can we live a life similar to Jesus, and how can we be like a palm tree? One of the important characteristics that a palm tree has is a prosperous fruit. The season fall. When God asks us for fruit, what kind of a fruit can we give him? Well, fruit of evangelizing, fruit of personality. Well, I hope you'll be able to prosperously grow those fruits and be able to glorify and make Jesus happy. So second blessing that a righteous will receive is they will grow like a cedar of Lebanon. Let us read verse 12 together. Psalms chapter 92 verses 12. The righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon. So they will grow like a cedar of Lebanon. So the second blessing that a righteous will receive is that they will grow like a cedar of Lebanon. And this cedar of Lebanon is eres in Hebrew, and the root is firmly planted, so it's very firm. And it came from the word araz, it means fern. So the cedar of Lebanon, it has such firm fruits, so that because the roots grow so further down into the ground and it's so planted within the ground firmly, it grows so much. So it grows almost as the size of a 13-story apartment. And especially the cedar that grows in Lebanon is worldwide famous. So the cedar of Lebanon, what kind of a life does it represent? It represents 3 types of life. First is a scented life, a beautifully scented life. So why is it called a cedar? It's because it gives off very beautiful scents to the surroundings. So a person living like a cedar of Lebanon it will give off scent. So it's like a scented life of scent.
Tenemos que dar ese aroma de felicidad, esa cara de felicidad.
2 Corinthians chapter 2 verses 15 describes that we are the scent of Jesus Christ. Let's read 2 Corinthians chapter 2 verses 15. It says that, for we are to God the pleasing aroma, the pleasing aroma of Christ. So let's say to the person next to us, let us become the Chanel number 5. Well, do you not know what that means? It's the most favorite perfume that is loved by everyone in this world. A lot of people is Chanel number 5. So we must become the aroma aroma of Christ. And if we give a bad scent, then how can we live like a life of a cedar? Because a cedar gives off such scent and aroma, so that despite in this world that is filled with evil and disgusting smell, among them we must be able to become the aroma of Christ. And 3 is the aroma of gospel. So aroma of gospel. When we spread the word and when we give word to other people, that word itself becomes the aroma of Christ that will represent Jesus. That will represent God. So when we spread the word to the people, it becomes 2 scents. First, it's the aroma that leads to death. And secondly, it could become the aroma of life. So, what kinds of people will get the aroma of death? Well, if you reject the word, if you reject the gospel, then you will get, even though we spread the word, they reject it. Well, because they will die amongst God's judgment. Well, if you reject the gospel of life, what the results for them are death. So that's why for them, this word will be a scent of death, aroma of death. However, when I spread the word, when I give this word of life, people who will accept the word, it will become the aroma of life for them, because within that word there's life. And when you give in that gospel into yourself, you will become the owner of that gospel, so you will become the aroma of life.
Una vida normal, sino una vida eterna, una vida donde estaremos con nuestro Señor reinando para siempre. Pero aquellos que no la aceptan tendrán ese olor.
So you gave the same 2 gospels, but people who reject it, it becomes a aroma of death for them, because they did not give in the word, they will die. However, for others, they give in the word, they accept the word, and for them, this word will become an aroma of life, a scent of life. In order to understand this further, so we must need to understand the background of Rome. So Rome conquers most of God's nations, so that when the general returns, citizens of Rome, they roam out in the streets and they cheer and welcome the soldiers and the returning soldiers. And then they go to their shrines, they go to their buildings, and they worship to their God, and they light scents to thank them. And the scent in that case will be a scent of life. However, you also light scents when the dead soldiers return too. For them, that will be the scent of death for them. So in that shrine, when you set on scents for the victorious people, it will become the scent of life. Before the ones that were lost and they came as slaves, the ones that became the colonies, well, that will become the aroma of death for them. The important thing is that when we give the gospel, when we spread the word, is that this is the aroma of God. And prayer is also God's aroma as well. Exodus chapter 30, verses 7. The tabernacle, in the middle, there is a incense. It's the tent of incense. So let us read Exodus chapter 30, verses 7. Aaron must burn fragrant incense on the altar every morning when he tends the lamps. So, that fragrant incense. Let us read Revelations chapter 5, verses 8. Revelations chapter 5, verses 8. And when he had taken it, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each one had a harp. They were holding golden bowls full of incense, which were the prayers of God's people. So, the prayer that we give to God, he smells it as if it's a fragrant incense. Well, if I live a life without prayer, you will live a life that will give off disgusting fragrance in front of God.
Las oraciones de los hijos de Dios tienen que ser fragancias aromáticas que nosotros traemos.
So even if it's not for a special purpose, one of the responsibilities as our congregation member of this church is that we must bow down and pray to God, and that prayer itself will become a fragrant incense to God and it will go up to heaven. However, if we forget about prayer, if we live our life without prayer, then our life will become like, it will stink. Our life will stink. So we must, in order to live a life like a cedar, we must give off a good fragrance. And it's also a scent, aroma of dedication. Third is the scent of dedication. So when we give offering to God, that offering, it becomes a fragrant smell. So the offerings that we give to God, we burn, right? We burn the offering and smell will come out, right? To God, that smell is a fragrant smell. It's a nice smell to God. It's like a fragrance scent. So an offering means dedication. And when we live a life to dedication to God, that life itself becomes the scent, becomes the aroma. If I sacrifice my time, if I work hard in church, if I dedicate my life to church and to God, that dedication itself, God receives it as a fragrant scent. And then to our surrounding people as well, that fragrance will become useful to us as well.
Quiero hacer todo esto que es agradable ante los ojos de Dios. Y nuestro Dios lo recibe como la fragancia más valiosa.
So, Mary had broken a perfume, and she had washed Jesus' feet with that fragrance. And that means that Mary had given her dedication to Jesus. The room was filled with incense. Let us read John chapter 12 verses 3. John chapter 12 verses 3. It says, Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So when we give dedication to our church, then the house, then it will be filled with fragrance. So fragrance means aroma means three things. First is the aroma of prayer, aroma of dedication, and the aroma. So and secondly, cedar not only represents a life of fragrance, but a life that is a life that will be the pillars of God. Pillars in the courts of God. So
Seamos como María que enjugó los pies de nuestro Señor Jesucristo con ese perfume carísimo, pero lo hizo
let
ella
us read.
porque amaba al Señor.
Let us read. So when Solomon built the church temple of Solomon, the pillars that he used were the cedars of Lebanon. So we hope that we could also become the pillars of the courts of God as well. That is what living a life of a cedar is like. You are used by God. You are used as a pillar of God, like the Solomon. So the Church of Solomon, like how he used the cedars of Lebanon as the two pillars. Well, then we must become that useful to God as well. There's three people that are used as like a pillars. Let us read Galatians chapter 2 verses 9. Galatians chapter 2 verses 9. It says that James, Cephas, and John, who's esteemed as pillars, gave me and Barnabas the right hand of the fellowship when they recognized the grace given to me. So they were esteemed as pillars. Like the cedars of Lebanon, they were used by God. They were used by God. So we must become the people like pillars as well that will be used by God. Well, but then the pillars must not shake. If the pillars shake, then the building will collapse. And whatever you do, the pillars must keep its place. Well, the pillars won't be like, oh, I'm so tired, I will walk out. Well, and if they walk out, the building will collapse. So the pillars must not shake. In order for us to be used by God as pillars, we must be firm. Our faith must not shake. So whether there's snow, there's wind, there's rain, whether there's morning, night, we must fulfill the mission that God gives us. We must. And those people, like a cedar tree, like a pillar, be used by God. And third is an unchanging faith. So cedar tree is a tree that gives off fragrance. Is giving off fragrance. And second, used as pillars. Well, third is that it's unshaken faith. Well, so a cedar tree is unchangeable and it could last up to 1,000 years. Well, a fun fact is so if you look if you look in Acts chapter 19 verses 24, so it says a silversmith named Demetrius who made silver shrines of Artemis brought a lot of business across man here. So the shrines of Artemis. So the materials that were used there, it could remain up to 400 years. It could last up to 400 years. And for us to live a life like a cedar tree, our faith must not change.
de situaciones. Puede durar hasta 200 años. Así
So
nos
people
vemos
who have
nuestra vida como
unchanging
hijos de Dios.
faith,
Nuestra
those
fe
people
delante
are
de
like
Él
the cedar
sea
tree.
para siempre.
When
Que
people, their
terminemos
business
la
is
carrera
hard,
en este
they
mundo
believe in
y
Jesus so
podamos
much, but
llegar
then
a
when their
nuestra
life is
meta
going smooth
final
and
con
well,
esa
they
fe que
sometimes
nos
forget
haga
Jesus. When we have
caracterizar
hardships,
como los hijos
we find
verdaderos
God,
de
we
nuestro
look for
Dios.
God.
Que
But
damos
when we are living a good life and our life is going
buen
smooth,
fruto,
we
que
go
llevamos
away
esa
further from God.
fragancia aromática en nuestras vidas, en nuestros
Well,
corazones, la hemos llevado hasta el final.
like students, they serve God well, but then when they graduate school, they graduate church too. Well, if you have faith once, that faith should be unchanging until Jesus' second coming. Until the last breath of my life ends. We must serve the church. We must make God happy. So we must have unchanging faith like the cedar tree is unchanging and it lasts for thousands of years. Let us, in conclusion,
En conclusión,
what kind of a person is a righteous person?
¿qué
Well,
clase de persona
verse 14 it says, they will stand bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green.
la persona justa
Let us read
siempre
verse 14 together, our main word, verse 14.
con vida, estará
Let's read it together.
llevando los buenos frutos.
They will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green.
En la palabra
Well,
aprendemos
people
que
aren't
aunque
like
sea
that though.
en las
People, when they grow
años de la
old, they
vejez,
can't bear fruit
siempre dará buenos
because
frutos.
because
Siempre
we're
estará
so tired and
como
we're
el
so
árbol de la
weary.
palmera,
We get
fuerte.
old. We lack light. However, the Bible says that
La Biblia nos
we
enseña
must bear fruit in old age. We must bear fruit in old age as well. And they will stay
de
fresh and
años
green.
avanzados. Siempre debemos de dar
Even though you grow old in age,
estemos
if we
ancianitos,
get above 50, we get above 70, we get above 60,
no importa la edad, 60, 80, 100, lo que sea, nosotros tenemos que dar esos frutos espirituales
we could
para
still
nuestro
give
Señor.
off light. So the righteous, even though they grow old, they will still be able to grow life and they will still be able to give off light. They will have energy. They will live a fresh and green life and they will bear fruit in such an old age as well.
Que no tienen esa
Moses was
capacidad.
called by God at 80 years old, and he was used as one of the most important leaders of the Exodus.
Mayor. Y él fue el que guió, el que guió a los israelitas por todo el desierto. ¿Por qué? Porque nuestro Señor, a pesar de que él tenía una edad avanzada, él se entregó a servirle a él.
And if we believe that God is with us,
Tenemos que
and
saber
God
que
is with
nuestro
us.
Dios está con nosotros. Y no tenemos que dudar de eso.
And Caleb, at the age of 85, he went to Joshua and told him that he will be able to conquer the territory of Hebron, one of the most hardest places to conquer at 85 years old. He believed that God will give him the energy. And if God is with him, there's nothing impossible. So that he went. At 85 years old, he went and conquered the land of Hebron. Let us read verse 13 together. Psalms chapter 92, verses 13. Let us read it together. Planted in the house of the Lord, they will flourish in the courts of our God. Planted in the house of the Lord, they will flourish in the courts of our God. So planted, God had moved us and planted us. Where were we first planted? We were planted outside of the house of our Lord. However, from there, God had moved us and planted us inside his house. Inside. So we're continuously planted in there. So, and because we're planted inside God's house, we will be able to fulfill and bear fruit even at an old age. And we'll still be fresh, we'll still be green, we'll still be prosperous. And for two reasons. Because it's God protects us. God protects us. trees that are planted in God's house, God protects us. God takes care of us. Who protects us when
Él nos protege.
our life will be protected by God.
Él protege nuestras vidas. Él protege nuestras acciones, nuestros pensamientos. Pero para tener esa
His hand will be
protección,
holding on to us
nosotros tenemos que dar
because we're planted in His house.
nuestra vida
And
a
His
Él,
house,
y así florecer, y así
it's
tener
describing
esa
the church. You guys should stay in church. You guys must stay in church, and that's the only reason. That's the only way God will protect you. Because you're going through a hard time, you leave church. You're mad, so you leave church. You're tempted, so you leave church. Well, then you're going out of God's safety. You're going out of God's safety. God cannot protect you. And secondly, how are we able to bear fruit at an old age and be fresh? Well, God's house is flowing with living water because the word is the living water. Trees that are planted in God's house. It's like a tree that is planted in the rivers, in the riverside. No matter what drought it comes, we're not worried because with God's flowing water, we'll be fresh and we'll be green. Because God's house, there's a water called the Word. Let us read Ezekiel. Let us read Ezekiel chapter 47 verses 1. Ezekiel 47 verses 1. It says, man brought me. So the man brought me back to the entrance of the temple, and I saw water coming out from under the thresholds of the temple towards the east. So the water. So God's house, there's flowing water, and that flowing water is the word. So when there's drought, when the climate is hot, when the temperature is hot, there's nothing to worry. So that even though at an old age, they will still bear fruit, and it will stay fresh and green. Let us read Ezekiel chapter 47 verses 1 together. The man brought me back to the entrance to the temple, and I saw water coming out from under the threshold of the temple towards the east. Wherever this water reaches, dead trees will become alive, dead fishes will become alive. Well, because it's the living water. And it's a living water called God's Word. So, people like palm trees. People like the cedar tree. No matter how old they are, they will be able to bear fruits. They will still be fresh. They will be green no matter what drought comes, no matter what happens to them. We will live a life like that. Whatever situation you're in, do not leave church. But the biggest grace that you will receive is that you're planted in church. A cedar tree that is planted in God's house. Planted in God's house could flourish and grow like that because God protects us. And in the house of God, there's living water. Let us read Psalms chapter 1 verses 3. Psalms chapter 1 verses 3. That person is like a tree planted by the streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and its leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prosper. Whatever they do prosper because the water is always there. So if it's hot, they're not afraid. When there's drought, they're not afraid because the water is always there. People who leave God, however, at that moment that they leave God, they will be like a tree that is planted in the desert. Let us read Jeremiah chapter 17 verses 5 and 6. 5 and 6. This is what God says. Cursed is the one who trusts the man who draws strength from mere flesh and whose heart turns away from God. Person will be like a bush in a wasteland. They will not see prosperity. So, person like a bush in the wasteland. They cannot bear fruit. They are ugly.
muerto, en otras palabras.
So,
Pero cuando
they're
buscamos
cursed by God. They're cursed by
la
God.
palabra de nuestro Dios y recibimos lo que Él tiene para nosotros, es cuando reverdecemos y recibimos la bendición que Dios tiene para
What kind of a life do you want to live?
nosotros. ¿Qué clase de vida ustedes
Person who
quieren vivir?
leave God is like a life of grass.
¿Quieren vivir una vida
However,
sin Dios? Que es
those who
una
are
vida
planted in
como,
God's house, it's like a
como
cedar of
hierba
Lebanon.
seca.
Like a palm tree, they will
Quieren vivir una
flourish,
vida
prosper, and stay
próspera.
fresh and green.
como
They
palmera,
will
como
be
cedro de
prosperous. They
Líbano.
will bear fruit.
Quieren
They will be
vivir
used like
esa vida
pillars,
como
and they will be
el
used
árbol
by God.
que
And
da
with an
buen fruto.
unchanging faith, they will give joy to God. These
Quieren tener
life that
ese
the
gozo
only the
que el
righteous will
Señor
enjoy.
ofrece.
I hope
Yo
that
espero
will be for you guys who are all listening